Hey everyone, we're working hard to get our first 1,000 subscribers, sign up and you won't regret it. I didn't plan to show up. That's the part people always get wrong when they hear this story later. They imagine some dramatic father storming a house, fueled by rage and ego. In reality, I was tired. It had been a long month of schedule adjustments and, just this once, requests from my ex-wife, Vanessa. I'd been swallowing it because every time I pushed back, she'd threaten court. And every time she said the word court, my stomach did that drop it used to do when our marriage was dying, like the floor could disappear if I moved wrong. We'd been divorced for 2 years. I had my son, Bennett, every other week, plus Wednesdays. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. Bennett was 8, skinny in that kid way where the bones seemed temporary, his knees always scabbed, his hair always in his eyes. Vanessa called 3 days before Christmas. She told me she needed to switch Christmas Eve. Something about her family thing running late. She wanted Bennett overnight on the 24th. She promised I'd get Christmas morning. I said no. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a simple no. Then she did what she always did. She softened her voice into something sweet and tired, like I was the unreasonable one and she was the peacekeeper. She said Bennett would be devastated if I made this about us. She said I was punishing him for our marriage failing. She said I'd regret it. And then she said one more thing, almost like an afterthought, she'd already told him. That's what got me. The way she always used him like a chess piece, moving him first so I'd have to react. So I agreed. Against my better judgment, I agreed. But on Christmas Eve, around 7:30 p.m., Bennett FaceTimed me from Vanessa's phone and something felt off. He didn't swing the camera around the room like he usually did. He didn't show me the Christmas lights. He didn't tell me about dessert. He looked straight into the screen like he was trying to be quiet with his eyes. Behind him I could hear voices. Laughter. A bright kind of music. Glass clinks. Someone calling out, cheers, in that easy way people do when everything is fine. Bennett's lips looked pale. His nose was pink. He was wearing a t-shirt. Not even a hoodie. I asked him if he was cold. He nodded once, small. I asked where his sweatshirt was. He glanced off-screen like someone was standing right there. He said it was somewhere. Vanessa's hand came into frame, too fast and too cheerful. The phone shifted. Vanessa's face appeared, smiling, shiny, the way she looked when she wanted to appear like the perfect mother for an audience. She told me Bennett was being dramatic and that kids were always weird about outfits. Then she ended the call. Just like that. No goodbye from Bennett. No love you, Dad. A blank screen. I stood in my kitchen for a full minute staring at my own reflection in the dark window, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Then I remembered something. Bennett had asked me the week before if I could buy him a secret phone. Not because he wanted games. He said he wanted a way to call me if he got in trouble. I'd laughed it off back then, told him he could always ask to call me. He'd nodded like he agreed, but I'd seen his face. He hadn't believed it. That memory pushed me off the fence. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and the thick blanket I kept in the trunk for emergencies. I told myself I was just going to check in. I told myself I'd sit in the car, maybe text Vanessa to bring him to the door so I could see he was fine. Vanessa lived 20 minutes away in a newer development, nice lawns, matching mailboxes, the kind of neighborhood that tried to look like a brochure. When I pulled up, the house was lit like a movie set. Warm lights in every window. Christmas decorations that looked professionally installed. A big wreath on the door. A line of cars parked along the curb. A party. I got out and the cold hit my lungs hard. The wind had that wet bite like snow wanted to start but hadn't committed yet. That's when I saw him. Bennett was on the front steps. Not inside. Not playing. Not laughing. Outside. In shorts and a t-shirt. His knees were tucked up to his chest and he was hugging them like that was all he had. His little shoulders were shaking in quick, tight pulses. For a second my brain stalled. Like it didn't have a file for what I was seeing. Then I ran. Bennett, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I expected. He looked up and his face changed, relief first, then fear, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be relieved. I wrapped the blanket around him and lifted him up. He felt too light. His hands were ice. I asked what happened. He didn't answer right away. He just pressed his forehead into my shoulder like he was trying to disappear into my coat. When he finally spoke, his words were thin and careful. He said he'd said something wrong. That was it. No explanation. No tantrum. Just a kid who believed warmth was conditional. The front door opened. Vanessa stepped out like she'd been waiting for a cue. Behind her, the bright noise of the party spilled out. I caught a glimpse of people holding plates, a Christmas tree, someone's red sweater with reindeer. Vanessa's smile dropped the moment she saw me holding Bennett. She tried to speak first, her usual tactic. but I didn't let her. I walked past her, straight through the doorway, Bennett still in my arms, blanket wrapped around him like armor. The room went quiet in that unnatural way crowds do when something real interrupts them. I could feel eyes on me. Adults freezing mid-chew. A fork stopping halfway to a mouth. Someone turning down the music too late. And I said the 6 words that came out of me like they'd been stored up for months. Get your hands off my son. The color drained from faces. Not just Vanessa's. Multiple people went pale at once, like my sentence wasn't an accusation, it was a trigger. Vanessa's new husband, Trevor, was standing near the tree. He didn't move. He didn't even pretend to look confused. He stared at Bennett like Bennett was the problem. And that's when I understood something I hadn't been willing to admit until that second. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a system. And I had just walked into the middle of it. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave immediately, just get Bennett out, get him warm, figure it out later. But then Bennett tightened his grip around my neck and whispered something so small I almost missed it. He said Trevor had told him, earlier, that if he acted up, he'd be put outside again. Again. The word landed like a rock in my chest. I looked up at the room full of smiling adults and saw, for the first time, the thin crack in the picture they were selling. Somebody here knew. Somebody here had seen. And someone, maybe more than one, had decided it was easier to keep eating Christmas cookies than to protect an 8-year-old boy. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene the way people love to imagine. I just shifted Bennett higher in my arms, turned toward the hallway, and started walking, because I wasn't asking permission. Vanessa stepped in front of me, blocking the path, her voice suddenly sharp and low. Her hand reached for Bennett. I didn't back up. I didn't flinch. But behind Vanessa, Trevor finally moved, and the way he moved wasn't like a stepdad trying to help. It was like someone about to stop a problem before it got loud. And in that moment, with Bennett still trembling against me and a house full of witnesses watching like this was entertainment, I realized I had made a choice that could change everything. Because I wasn't leaving alone. And they weren't going to let me leave easily. Trevor didn't come at me fast. He came at me confident, like he was used to getting compliance without raising his voice. He angled himself beside Vanessa, filling the doorway space in a way that said, "We're the wall. You're the inconvenience." Vanessa's eyes were wide, not with concern, but with calculation. She was already arranging the story she'd tell in 10 minutes, unstable ex, dramatic entrance, ruined Christmas. I kept my own voice flat on purpose. No shouting. No chest puffing. I'd learned the hard way that the person who stays calm looks believable later. I told Vanessa I was taking Bennett home to warm up. She made a move to touch him again. Bennett flinched so hard his whole body jerked. That flinch did more than any argument could have done. Half the people in that living room saw it. You can't unsee a child recoil from a parent's hand. Vanessa's face tightened. She tried to play it off with a laugh that didn't land. Trevor said something about rules and respect. He tried to position himself as the adult in charge. I ignored him. I stepped sideways, aiming for the front door. Vanessa followed, crowding close. Trevor stayed in front of me, blocking. Bennett's teeth started chattering against my collarbone. I could feel the tremor in his back. I adjusted the blanket around him and made a decision that felt cold but necessary. I pulled my phone out with my free hand and hit record. Not in a dramatic, look at me, way. Just, quietly. Screen down. Audio running. Vanessa noticed. Her eyes flicked to my hand. Trevor noticed too. His jaw flexed once. And suddenly, they both stopped talking over each other. They became careful. That alone told me I was right to record. Vanessa shifted tactics. She widened her eyes, softened her mouth, and turned to the room like she needed witnesses. She started talking about how I wasn't supposed to be there. How I was breaking boundaries. How Bennett was fine and I was scaring him. I didn't respond. Because Bennett wasn't fine. Bennett was shaking in my arms like a wet puppy. I walked forward again, slow and steady. Trevor leaned in, just enough that nobody across the room would see it as aggressive. His voice dropped into that private range that feels like a threat even when the words are polite. He told me to put Bennett down. Bennett made a sound, more breath than word, and buried his face harder into my shoulder. Then Trevor's hand reached toward Bennett's arm. I stepped back a half step and repeated myself, quieter this time, but with a hard edge. Get your hands off my son. That's when I saw it. Not on Trevor. On a woman standing near the kitchen doorway, holding a wine glass. She wasn't smiling. Her face was frozen, and not with shock at me. With fear at them. She looked at Bennett like she already knew what Bennett would say if somebody asked the right question. Her gaze met mine for 1 second and then she looked away, fast, like she'd been caught. It was the first real crack in Vanessa's perfect world. Trevor's phone buzzed. He checked it without thinking. And I saw the name on the screen, Mom. Not Vanessa. Not his mom visiting. A separate person entirely. He typed a quick reply and slid the phone away. Vanessa spoke again, sharper, more desperate. She told me Bennett was grounded. She said he'd been disrespectful. She said he needed consequences. I looked down at Bennett and asked him, softly, why he was outside. He hesitated. That hesitation was the real story. Kids don't hesitate when the truth is safe. Then he whispered that he'd knocked over a drink. Just a drink. He said Trevor got mad and told him he was ruining everything and that he didn't deserve to be in here. Then, barely audible, Bennett added that he'd been outside until he learned. Vanessa tried to interrupt, but I kept my eyes on Bennett, not her. I asked him if it had happened before. Bennett nodded once. I asked how many times. He held up 2 fingers. Then, after a second, added 1 more finger. 3. 3 times a child had been used like a prop until he became inconvenient. The room behind Vanessa shifted. People were doing the mental math of whether staying silent made them complicit. I didn't give them time to decide. I turned toward the front door again and walked. Trevor moved to block me and, for the first time, his control slipped. His posture changed. His breathing changed. He reached out again. And I did the one thing that can't be spun later. I called 911. Not screaming. Not theatrics. Just a clear statement, child left outside in winter, visible shaking, I'm removing him, adults attempting to stop me. The word winter did something to the room. Someone's mouth opened like they were about to protest, then closed. Vanessa went pale now for real. Not performative pale. Trevor's eyes narrowed, and I watched him calculate like a man who knew what the police would find if they asked questions. Vanessa started talking fast, trying to drown out my call. Trying to create noise so the dispatcher couldn't hear. I stepped outside with Bennett still wrapped tight, still shaking. I didn't run. Running looks guilty. I walked to my car. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was hitting my ribs from the inside. Behind me, the front door opened and closed. Someone followed. Footsteps on the porch. I turned slightly and saw it was the woman from the kitchen doorway. Wine glass gone. Face tense. She didn't come close. She stayed near the steps like she didn't want cameras on her. But she spoke anyway, just loud enough for me to hear. She didn't address me like an enemy. She addressed me like a parent. She told me to check Bennett's backpack. Then she turned and went back inside before anyone could see her talking to me. I got Bennett into the car, turned the heat on full, and drove away as the dispatcher kept me on the line. Bennett's lips were still pale. His eyes looked glassy from cold and fear. I asked him where his backpack was. He pointed toward the trunk of Vanessa's SUV. And that's when the dispatcher told me officers were en route to Vanessa's address. I didn't feel relief. I felt dread. Because if a woman at a Christmas party was risking herself to tell me to check a backpack, then whatever was in that backpack wasn't just a missed jacket. It was proof. And I had a sick feeling Vanessa and Trevor knew exactly what it would prove. The first thing I did when we got home was get Bennett warm. Not tea in a blanket, warm. Actual, full-body warm, thick pajamas, socks, heating pad against his feet, my spare hoodie pulled over his head like a tent. I didn't ask him questions right away. I didn't want him to feel interrogated. I just sat beside him on the couch and kept my voice normal while I told him he wasn't in trouble. He kept nodding like he understood, but his hands were still clenched. While he sipped hot cocoa, I opened my phone and looked at the recording. I listened to it with one earbud in, low volume, like it was contraband. You could hear the party. The clinking glasses. Vanessa's calm voice turning sharp in flashes. Trevor's low, controlled tone. And you could hear Bennett's chattering teeth. That audio alone made my stomach twist. But audio isn't always enough. People lie. People spin. People say a kid was being dramatic, and the world shrugs. I needed something they couldn't reinterpret. I remembered what the woman said. The backpack. Vanessa's place was 20 minutes away. Police were already headed there. I wasn't going back tonight. Not with Bennett finally warming up. Not with adrenaline still controlling my hands. So I did the next best thing. I checked Bennett's school backpack that he'd brought to my place earlier in the week, the one he kept here. Not the one in the SUV trunk. I dug through it thinking I'd find a note, maybe a missing glove. Instead, I found a second zipper pocket I hadn't noticed. Inside was a cheap prepaid phone. The secret phone. My throat went tight. It was off. No passcode. I turned it on and my hands went cold again, even in my warm living room. On the home screen there was one contact saved. Dad. And under it, another one. Not Mom. Not Vanessa. Just a name. Rita. I didn't know a Rita. Bennett's teacher wasn't Rita. His friends' moms weren't Rita. Then I opened the photo gallery. And my vision narrowed like a tunnel. There were pictures of Bennett's legs, close-up shots of red marks. Pictures of the porch steps. Pictures of the snow-dusted railing. And one picture that made my stomach drop. A screenshot of a message on Vanessa's phone. Bennett must have taken it when nobody was looking. The message was from Trevor to Vanessa. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't flirty. It was cold, tactical. It was about training Bennett. About keeping him in line before he turns into his dad. And then, buried in the middle, a line that froze me. Trevor had written that if Bennett talked, Vanessa needed to stick to the plan because it'll look like he's coached. A plan. Not a parenting argument. A plan. I sat there staring at that screenshot until the room felt like it was tilting. I looked at Bennett on the couch. His eyes were half-lidded, exhaustion finally winning. His cheeks had color again. His shoulders weren't shaking anymore. And I realized something ugly. This hadn't started tonight. This had been built. Carefully. I checked the messages. Most of the texts were to me. Bennett had tried to call twice in the past month, missed calls I never got. Because they came from an unknown number. And my phone had auto-silenced unknowns during work hours. I hadn't even known. In the call log there were also outgoing calls to Rita. Short calls. 15 seconds. 30 seconds. Like Bennett was checking if someone was available, then hanging up if he got scared. I opened the last text thread with Rita. No long conversation. Just a handful of messages. Bennett had written things like, "Can I come over?" and "He's mad," and "It's cold." Rita replied with short, careful answers. "Are you safe? Where is your mom? Do you want me to call your dad?" Then I understood who she was. A neighbor. Someone close enough that Bennett could reach her without asking permission. Someone who'd already been watching enough to know this wasn't normal. I called the number. A woman answered, cautious. I introduced myself. I told her I was Bennett's dad. I told her I'd picked him up and he was safe. I didn't ask her to explain everything. I didn't want to scare her off. I just asked one question. Had she seen Bennett outside before? There was a pause. Then she said yes. More than once. She said she'd tried to talk to Vanessa about it and Vanessa acted offended, like it was a misunderstanding. She said she'd considered calling the police before, but she was scared Vanessa would retaliate or that it would make things worse for Bennett if the adults got angry. Then she said something that tightened my spine. She said Trevor had come to her door one night after she'd let Bennett warm up for 10 minutes. Not yelling. Not threatening. Just smiling. He'd told her to mind her own business. He'd told her Bennett lies and that I was the kind of father who tries to steal custody. He'd planted the story in advance, so if she ever spoke up, she'd sound biased. My hands clenched around the phone so hard my knuckles hurt. I asked if she'd be willing to talk to police if needed. Another pause, longer. She said yes. She said she couldn't keep watching. Then she asked me if Bennett had told me about the camera. I asked what camera. Her voice dropped. She said Trevor had installed a camera on the porch pointed right at the steps. She said she thought it was for packages. But now she wasn't sure. The idea hit me fast and sick. If there was a camera, it wasn't just punishment. It was documentation. They weren't just putting Bennett outside. They were filming it. Maybe to scare him. Maybe to prove he was acting out. Maybe to build a case that he was unstable. Or, worse, to prove something else. I ended the call, sat in silence, and stared at the little prepaid phone like it was a bomb. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail from an unknown number. I played it. It was Vanessa. Her voice wasn't panicked. It was controlled, like she'd already decided what the story was. She said I had kidnapped Bennett. She said I was violating custody. She said if I didn't bring him back immediately, she'd do what she had to do. Then, almost casually, she added that Bennett had been acting up and that I was rewarding his behavior. It wasn't the threat that scared me. It was the calm. Because calm meant preparation. I checked my email. There it was. A message from a family law firm I'd never contacted. Subject line, emergency motion notice. My stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous. Vanessa wasn't reacting. She was executing. And suddenly the pieces lined up in a way that made me feel cold all over again. The last-minute schedule swap. The party full of witnesses. Bennett outside. Me arriving angry. Me carrying him out. Me calling 911. Me recording. Me driving away. If they framed it right, I'd look like the unstable ex who crashed Christmas and took the child. I wasn't just fighting for Bennett's comfort. I was fighting for custody, and they'd been setting the stage long before I ever pulled into that driveway. I looked at Bennett asleep on my couch, still in my hoodie, a dried cocoa mustache on his lip. And I realized the wow factor in this story wasn't going to be a secret affair. It was something more chilling. Vanessa and Trevor didn't just want control. They wanted a narrative. And they were about to try to bury me under it. The next morning was Christmas Day. But it didn't feel like Christmas. It felt like the morning after a car crash, quiet, surreal, your body trying to pretend nothing happened while your mind replays impact. I didn't wake Bennett early. I let him sleep. Then I made 3 calls in a row, each one a brick in a wall. First, my family attorney. Second, my sister, who lived nearby and could be a calm adult witness at my house. Third, CPS, because I wasn't going to let Vanessa be the first one to file something and control the timeline. That third call felt like swallowing glass, because nobody wants to invite that kind of scrutiny into their life. But here's what I'd learned about people like Vanessa: they weaponize the system because most normal people are too uncomfortable to use it first. I gave CPS the facts. No drama. No revenge speech. Child left outside in freezing weather in shorts and t-shirt. Multiple prior incidents reported by neighbor. Evidence in photos. Threatening voicemail. Emergency motion filed. I told them Bennett was safe with me and warm and fed and calm. Then I waited. Vanessa arrived at noon with Trevor and 2 relatives, an audience. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood inside with my sister beside me, the chain lock on, my phone recording, Bennett in the back room with a tablet and headphones so he wouldn't hear it. Vanessa started crying the second she saw my sister. Not quiet crying. Big, showy, trembling lip crying. She told the story she'd planned. I had barged in, scared Bennett, snatched him, refused to return him, and now I was keeping him from his mother on Christmas. Trevor stood behind her looking solemn, like a supportive husband. Vanessa demanded I hand Bennett over. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I didn't call her names. I told her I'd already spoken to the police last night. Her eyes flickered. I told her I'd already spoken to CPS that morning. Her crying stopped for half a second, like her face forgot what expression to hold. I told her I had recordings and photos. Trevor's jaw tightened. Vanessa tried to push past the chain lock. I held the door steady and repeated, calmly, that Bennett would stay with me until this was handled through proper channels. That's when Vanessa dropped the performance and went cold. She told me Trevor had connections. She told me I'd regret making enemies. Then she did the thing that would have worked on the old version of me. She said Bennett would grow up knowing I ruined Christmas. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I told her Bennett had been freezing on a porch while adults ate pie. I told her Christmas was already ruined. Then I closed the door. An hour later, a CPS investigator and a police officer arrived. Vanessa's face was back to soft and wounded by the time they walked up. Trevor was back to quiet, measured. They expected me to be the one who looked frantic. But I'd prepared. I played the audio from the night before. I showed the screenshots from Bennett's prepaid phone. I showed the photos of the porch steps, the red marks, the cold timestamps. Then I gave them Rita's information. The investigator's expression changed slightly, professional, but sharper now. The officer asked if there were any cameras on Vanessa's porch. I said yes, according to the neighbor. Trevor's eyes snapped to me. That was the first real crack I saw in him all day. Because cameras don't lie the way people do. And if that camera existed, it wouldn't just show Bennett outside. It would show how he got there. It would show whether he was pushed, escorted, threatened, filmed. It would show Vanessa's party inside while a kid sat outside shaking. The officer told Vanessa and Trevor they'd need access to the footage. Trevor said the camera was broken. The investigator asked when it broke. Trevor hesitated, just a beat. Vanessa jumped in with a date that sounded too quick, too rehearsed. The investigator looked at them both for a long moment, like she could see the script under their skin. Then she asked for Bennett. Not to interrogate him. Just to speak with him privately. Bennett came out slowly, holding my sister's hand. He looked small in the hallway, but he wasn't shaking today. The investigator spoke gently. Bennett answered quietly. He didn't give a long speech. Kids rarely do. But he did say one thing that landed like a hammer. He said Trevor told him the porch camera was for proof. Proof. That word made the investigator's eyes sharpen. Because proof means intention. It means planning. It means this wasn't a mistake. The investigator asked Bennett what the proof was for. Bennett said, simply, that Trevor said they needed proof Bennett was bad so he could go away. Go away where? Bennett shrugged like he didn't understand the system, only the threat. After that, the adults stopped treating this like a custody spat. They treated it like child endangerment. Vanessa's relatives started shifting uncomfortably. One of them murmured that they didn't know. Another kept saying Vanessa was a good mom. But the investigator wasn't interested in character testimonials. She was interested in patterns and evidence. And now she had both. Here's the twist that made everything snap into place. 2 days later, my attorney called and told me Trevor had a prior record involving a different child in a past relationship, nothing that made neighborhood gossip, nothing Vanessa's family would have easily found, but enough that a thorough background check would flag it. Which meant Vanessa either didn't know, or she knew and decided it was worth the risk. Either way, she'd chosen Trevor over Bennett's safety. And that meant the court didn't see her as misguided. They saw her as negligent. The emergency hearing happened fast. Vanessa showed up with the same performance, tears, trembling voice, concern. Trevor showed up quiet again. But our side had something stronger than emotion. We had time-stamped photos. We had audio. We had a neighbor witness. We had CPS involvement. And we had the biggest thing Vanessa and Trevor hadn't counted on. Bennett had his own evidence because he'd been trying to survive inside their narrative long before I arrived. The judge granted me temporary emergency custody pending investigation. Vanessa got supervised visitation only. Trevor was ordered to have zero contact with Bennett. And Vanessa's plan, the one about making Bennett look coached, making me look unstable, collapsed under the weight of actual facts. Justice didn't come as a dramatic mic drop moment. It came as paperwork, supervised schedules, and official language that finally matched what Bennett had been living through. The satisfying part wasn't revenge. It was relief. The first night after the hearing, Bennett asked me if he was allowed to wear his hoodie inside. I told him he was allowed to wear whatever made him comfortable. He nodded like he was taking in a new law of physics. Then he asked if he could leave his shoes by the door. I said yes. He did it carefully, like he expected someone to punish him for making a mess. And that's when it hit me hardest. Vanessa and Trevor hadn't just put him outside. They'd been training him to feel like comfort was something he had to earn. I sat on the edge of his bed later and watched him fall asleep without flinching at footsteps in the hallway. And I thought about those 6 words again. Get your hands off my son. Back at the party, that sentence turned everyone pale.